Hi, I'm Rebecca from Little Monkeys Crochet, and I am going to teach you how to make the Malia Beanie and the Malia Slouch. Both of these patterns can be found on my blog, along with other coordinating patterns like the Malia Scarf and the Malia Buttoned Cowl. I'm going to be making the beanie version of this pattern here, but you can still follow along if you want to make the slouchy version. Most of the instructions are the same, and anytime they're different, you're going to see the slouchy numbers in these curly brackets in the pattern. And of course, I will help you as we go. For the samples in the pattern photos, I used Rustic Romantic Yarn by Yarn Bee, which you can find at Hobby Lobby. It's a number 4 medium weight yarn that falls into the Aran subcategory, so very similar to like a Vanna's Choice. I'm pretty much obsessed with this Rustic Romantic yarn. It comes in these gorgeous colors. It's 85% acrylic, 15% hemp, which gives it this cozy rustic look. For this tutorial though, I'm going to use another yarn from Hobby Lobby called I Love This Yarn because it's a smoother, single colored yarn, and I think you'll be able to see my stitches better. It also has a really similar gauge to the Rustic Romantic. To start this pattern, we're going to begin with a magic circle. I do have a more in-depth tutorial if you need a little bit of extra help with your magic circle, and I will link that below the video. But to get started, we're just going to go ahead and do that magic circle and chain 1. For round 1, we're going to put 14 single crochets inside of our magic circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You can pull it. You don't have to pull it super tight. It'll actually help you out a little bit if it's not extremely tight at this point, because for this pattern we're doing a faux cinched top, and we are going to be cramming a lot of stitches in the next 2 rounds after this, and it's just easier if you give yourself a little bit of space by not pulling that tight yet. We can pull it tight at the end. So go ahead and join to that first single crochet with a slip stitch, and that's your first round. For round 2, we're going to chain 1. We're going to put 2 single crochets in each stitch around. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. One, 2 in the first, 1, 2 in the second, 1, 2 in the third, and we're just going to continue all the way around the circle, putting 2 in each one. When we're done with this round, we're going to join it with a slip stitch to the top of the first single crochet. As you can see, this is getting wavy, and this is only going to get wavier for the next round. Now this is where it gets really fun. For round 3, we're going to chain 1, and we are going to put 3 single crochets in each stitch around. It's going to get very crowded, but there is a reason that we're doing this. It's going to give us the really nice cinched top that we want, and it's going to increase us to the total number of stitches that we want very quickly so that we can start with the vertical part of the pattern, and this part of the pattern is hardly even going to show in the finished product. So go ahead and chain 1, put 3 single crochets in each stitch around. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and just keep going around. Okay, so I've just put my 3 single crochets in the final stitch, and I'm going to join with a slip stitch to the top of the first single crochet of that round. And that's the completion of round 3. And right now we have this extremely wavy little flower looking thing. And that is the top of our hat. And now we are going to switch to rows, vertical rows. So we're going to call the first one row 1 and start back at the beginning of the count. For row 1, if you're doing the beanie along with me, we are going to chain 29. If you're doing the slouchy version, you're going to want to chain 35 here. That's the number in those curly brackets in the instructions on the left. So go ahead and make your chain. I'm doing 29. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. And again, that's for the beanie size. If you are doing the slouch hat, go ahead and do 35. Okay, next the directions tell us to turn, and we just made that chain with the right side of the fabric facing us. Now I'm going to have you go ahead and do your stitches down the chain, and then we'll turn and we'll make sure that we're facing the right way before we move on, because if we turn right now, it's just going to move around and, you know, you're not even going to be able to tell if you've turned or not. So ignore that instruction for right now, and I will show you how to make sure that we're doing it the right way when we get to the end of this row. So what we're going to do now is in the second chain from the hook and each remaining chain, we're going to single crochet. So skipping this chain because this is the first chain on the hook, we're going to single crochet in the second chain from the hook. And I am just going into the back loop. You can crochet into the bump if you want to, that back bump. It's really just a matter of preference. Depending on what type of project I'm doing, sometimes I will go into the back bump, but for this one, it really doesn't matter that much. So just go ahead and single crochet all the way down that chain. So I've just completed my single crochets down the chain. This is where we're going to make sure that we are turned the correct way. So with the right side of the work facing you, we're going to turn the circle over, and now we've got the back of the work facing us. You can tell because your starting tail is sticking out. And what we're going to do is slip stitch to that stitch that is right down underneath the chain. And then we're going to slip stitch to the next stitch along our circle. So we've done 2 slip stitches, and that is the completion of row 1. You should have 28 single crochets if you're doing the beanie. You should have 34 if you're doing the slouchy hat, plus the 2 slip stitches down at the bottom there. For row 2, we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. We're going to start working up this vertical row. And in order to get started, we need to skip over that chain 1 that we made, and we also need to skip over those 2 slip stitches that we made, because those do not count as part of this row. If you've watched the video tutorial that I published for how to add ribbing to the bottom of a crochet project, then this technique is going to seem familiar to you, because we are doing the exact same thing that we do in that tutorial. So again, skipping over your chain 1 and skipping over the 2 slip stitches, you're going to single crochet starting here in each of the first 22 stitches. If you're doing the slouchy version, you're going to single crochet in each of the first 28 stitches. Basically what we're doing is we're single crocheting until there are 6 stitches left at the end. That's for whichever size hat you're doing. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Now if I started in the right stitch and I counted my stitches, I should have 6 stitches left at the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you have 6 left at the end, whether you're doing the beanie or the slouchy, then you are on the right track. These last 6 stitches are what's going to form the ribbing on the bottom of the beanie. So what we're going to do now is we're going to single crochet in the back loop only of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 1 stitch remaining, and we are going to single crochet in both loops of that final stitch. And the reason for that is that's going to give us a nice clean edge on the bottom of our hat. So every time we come down to this end of our rows, we're going to be doing back loops only. We're going to do both loops on the first stitch and back loops only on the next 5 stitches. Whether we're coming this direction or that direction, we're always going to do that here, and that's what's going to form the ribbing. So for row 3, we're going to chain 1, turn our work. And as we said, we're going to single crochet in both loops of that first stitch and the back loop only of each of the next 5 stitches. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now we're going to start the large bean stitch section of this pattern. I love this stitch. It really helps to use a nice smooth yarn that doesn't split and a nice smooth hook, and that's going to help you to be able to get your hook through all of the loops that we're about to make this bean stitch. The bean stitch is just a little bit different from the puff stitch because it starts with a single crochet, and that kind of pulls the stitch to one side, which makes it lean and kind of ends up looking, I think, like a coffee bean. And I just really love the texture that it makes. So what we're going to do is we're going to do repeats down this row of skip one stitch, large bean stitch in the next stitch. So this is the first stitch that we have. We're going to skip that one, and in the next stitch we're going to do a large bean stitch, and here's how we do it in both loops. So we're going to begin a single crochet but not finish it. So we're going to begin it, and then we're going to yarn over, insert your hook into the same loop, grab and pull through. You've got 4 loops on your hook now. Yarn over, insert into the same loops again, grab your yarn and pull it through. We've got 6 loops on the hook now. One more time, we're going to grab the yarn, insert into the same stitch, grab it, pull it through. We now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over and pull it through all 8 of those loops. Might take a little bit of practice, but again, if you have a nice smooth non-splitty yarn, shouldn't be too bad. And then we're going to chain 1 to close the stitch. So for each large bean stitch that we do, it's going to count as 2 in the final stitch count of the row because it creates 2 loops. One when you pulled through all those loops, that's the first one, and then 1 set of loops when you chained 1 to close the stitch. So we're going to skip the next stitch, and we're going to do another large bean stitch here. So insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, 4 loops on the hook, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, 6 loops on the hook, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, 8 loops on the hook, pull through all 8, chain 1 to close the stitch. Now this is actually the back side, or the inside, the wrong side of the hat, and if you turn it over you can see that the bean stitches are actually the most puffy and defined on their back side. This is actually going to be the front side of our hat, so that's why we are doing the bean stitches on the wrong side, because the back side of the bean stitch is nice and puffy, and that's going to give our hat some really gorgeous texture. Skip the next stitch, large bean stitch in the next. Pull through, chain 1, and we're going to do that for 11 large bean stitches if you're following me with the beanie. You're going to do it 14 times if you are doing the slouchy. Skip the next one, large bean stitch. I've just completed my last bean stitch. So I have my ribbing here. I've got 11 large bean stitches, 14 if you're doing the slouchy, and we are going to come back to our circle and we're going to slip stitch twice along the edge of our circle. So as we can see, we've already worked in this one. You can see the loops right there. We've already worked in there, so we're going to move on to the next one. And we're going to slip stitch 1, and then in the next one, slip stitch again. And that is the completion of row 3. So moving on to row 4, we're going to chain 1 and turn. We're going to half double crochet in each of the first 22 stitches, or if you're doing the slouchy, each of the first 28. Now to find the first stitch, once again, we are going to skip over the chain 1. We're going to skip over the 2 slip stitches, which are right here, and we're going to put our first half double crochet right there. So yarn over and insert, grab your yarn and pull it through all 3 loops for that half double crochet. 22 times for the beanie, 28 times for the slouch. And as you can see, I'm still going through the loops. Let me get to this part. I'm still going through the loops. I'm not going underneath or in between the bean stitches or anything like that. I'm still going through the loops. You always go through the loops unless you're instructed otherwise. I get that question a lot, so FYI. And that's my final half double crochet. I should have 6 stitches left. I'm gonna single crochet in the back loop of the first 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to single crochet in both loops of the final stitch. And that is the end of row 4. Chain 1 and turn. Now, as you can see, the ribbing section is going to be skinnier than the rest of it, and that's good because we want our ribbing section of the hat to kind of bring the hat in a little bit so that it stays nice and snug on our head. So for row 5, chain 1, turn, single crochet in that first stitch, single crochet in the back loops of the next 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, our instructions tell us to single crochet in the 3rd loop of each of the next 22 stitches, or 28 if you are doing the slouchy version. I'm going to show you how to find the 3rd loop. We were just single crocheting in the back loops, so these are the top loops. This is the back loop, this is the front loop. If you turn it just a little bit, you can see this loop underneath here. This is called the 3rd loop, and when you're working in turned rows, that 3rd loop of the half double crochet is always going to be facing you. So again, these are the top loops that we have been working in. Turn it to find that 3rd loop. We're going to single crochet in the 3rd loops of each of the rest of the stitches. So just stick your hook under there just like you would with the top loops and make a single crochet. Do it with the next one. And the next one. Keep going down, and after you've done a few, you can turn it over and see what it is that we're creating here is this nice raised double loop line, and that is going to add to the pretty pattern on the front of our hat. So go ahead and keep single crocheting in that 3rd loop all the way down the line. You're going to want to make sure that you're counting your stitches here, because it is a little bit difficult to see which one is the final stitch, because we have this extra stuff here that's created by all the slip stitching and the chaining that we're doing. And so sometimes it looks like, you know, I still have a few stitches left to go here, but I actually don't. I'm on my final stitch. And for whatever reason, that final half double crochet's third loop feels just a little bit tighter than the rest of them did, and that's my indication that I am finished with my row. I do like to go back and count though, just to make sure that I have 22 or 28 if you're doing the slouchy version. So that is the final stitch of that row, and as we've been doing before, we are going to slip stitch 2 times along the edge of our circle. So we have already slip stitched into this one. We can see that because we can see the loops grabbing onto it. So we're going to go to the next stitch, slip stitch, and the next one, slip stitch, and that is the end of round 5. For row 5, I'm sorry. For row 6, chain 1 and turn. And we've got this really pretty pattern forming on the front of the hat. Just love it. Skipping over that chain 1 and the 2 slip stitches. So the 3 sets of loops, chain 1, slip stitch, slip stitch. This is our first stitch right here. We are going to single crochet in each of the next 22 stitches, 28 if you're doing the slouch hat. 1, 2, 3, 4, working in both loops here, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Should have 6 stitches left. We're going to go in the back loops of the next 5 with a single crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're going to single crochet in both loops of that final stitch. Nice easy row. Row 7, chain 1 and turn, and we are back to large bean stitches. Single crochet in both loops of that first stitch, single crochet in the back loops of the next 5. All right, one little thing that I want to mention, when we did this row of large bean stitches, we skipped a stitch and then did a bean stitch, and then skipped and then did a bean stitch. We are going to switch that up for this row. We're going to start with a large bean stitch and then skip a stitch. The reason that we're changing that is because the way that the bean stitch is created, it's bulky and takes up 2 stitches, and when you always put it in the same spot on a flat piece like this, it's going to start pulling at the fabric in a really funny way, and I learned this the hard way and I had to figure out how to fix it. So we're just going to make sure that we're alternating every time we do the bean stitch row. The first time we're going to skip stitch, bean stitch, skip stitch, bean stitch. Next time we're going to bean stitch, skip stitch, bean stitch, skip stitch, and that's just going to keep the whole thing balanced. And that is written out in the pattern. So as you can see, this row 7, sorry, is just slightly different than row 3, which was the last time that we did the bean stitches. So just make sure that you are paying close attention to that. So bean stitch, large bean stitch in the first one. I'll show you that one more time. Insert your hook, grab it, pull through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, insert, grab, 4 loops on the hook, yarn over, insert, grab, 6 loops on the hook, yarn over, insert, grab, 8 loops on the hook. Pull through and chain 1 to close that bean stitch, and then skip the next stitch all the way down. Okay, I've just finished my 11th large bean stitch, 14 if you're doing the slouch hat. And because we're doing the large bean stitch, skip a stitch, you should have an empty stitch at the end here. This is the final stitch of my row. As long as you're counting, you'll be fine. So it's going to seem like a little bit of a leap here, but what we're going to do is we're going to slip stitch to the next two stitches around the circle. So this one's already been worked in right here. We're going to go to the next one. There we go. And then we're going to slip stitch in the next one as well. And that is the completion of row 7. Moving on to row 8, we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. We're going to half double crochet in each of the first 22 or 28 stitches. This is our first stitch of the row. So just half double crochet all the way down to the ribbing section. And with practice, you're not going to have to count as much. You'll just be able to tell when you get to the end of rows or when you get to the ribbing section, and this will start to seem a lot more natural. Single crochet in the back loops of the next 5. And single crochet in both loops of the final stitch. For row 9, we're going to chain 1 and turn. This is the last row before we start a series of row repeats. Single crochet in that first stitch, single crochet in the back loops for the next 5, and then we're going to single crochet in the third loops of the remaining stitches. So as we said before, you'll find the third loop by locating the top loops and then turning it just a bit, and you'll find that third loop right underneath, and we're just going to single crochet in that all the way down. 22 times for the beanie, 28 times for the slouch. Okay, I've just come to the end of the row, so I'm going to slip stitch to the next stitch along the circle. This one's already worked. We're going to move to the next one, slip stitch, and then do it again in the next. Oops. And that's the completion of row 9. Mine's looking a little bit puckered on this end. Yours shouldn't look quite as puckered. It's kind of difficult to crochet on camera because I'm at a much stranger angle than I usually am when I'm cozy on my couch with my legs crossed and my crochet in my lap. So my tension is going to be just a little bit off here, but it should be looking relatively straight for you. And to finish this pattern, we're going to be repeating rows 2 through 9 in order 9 more times. And then when we're done with that, we're going to repeat rows 2 through 4 one last time. So I'm going to put that up on the screen for you, and if you need to rewind the video back to previous rows, to the repeats, to remind yourself of exactly how they look, go ahead and do that. And it's going to bring us all the way around this wavy circle, all the way to the final stitch, and that's where we're going to end. Right now, this looks really silly with this little thing here, and just warning, it's going to look weird until you're almost finished, and you're probably going to wonder how is this going to work itself out, but I promise it's going to. And when you're done, it's going to look really nice and cinched perfectly, and then I'm going to show you how to seam up the hat at the end so that you can barely even tell that there is a seam. So go ahead and work on those repeats and then join me back on the video when you have gone all the way around the circle. Welcome back. If you've followed the instructions up to this point, you should have a basically fully formed hat that's just split all the way up the side here. And so I'm going to show you how to go ahead and seam this off so you can barely even tell there's a seam. So what I want you to do is fasten off and leave yourself a nice long tail. We're going to be using that to sew up the side of the hat. So mine is probably, I don't know, a couple feet, maybe a little bit longer, but I have more than I need. So what I want you to do is turn your hat inside out. The first thing I'm going to do is close up this magic circle and make it nice and secure. So I'm going to take the tail and pull to close it up real tight, and then I'm going to thread my yarn needle here. And I'm just going to weave under the stitches around that circle. Just do a few at a time. It's real tight, so it's easier to just do a few at a time. There's no real science to this. Just make sure you go through quite a few of them. And then to make it super secure, I want you to turn around in the other direction and do it again. Go ahead and fasten that off. And the top of your hat should be nice and secure at this point. Now turn your hat still inside out so that the seam is in front. And I'm going to show you how to seam this up. So I'm going to zoom in a bit. We're going to start with the ribbing. What I like to do is just match it up by holding it together. I want you to put your yarn needle through that very first stitch, through both loops, and through the first stitch on the other side. Pull that through. Now these hats tend to, when you seam it up like this, you're going to have a little bit of a dip here, and so what I like to do is come back around to a stitch on the edge, just to kind of make that not quite as much of a dip. So we're back to the first side, and what we're going to do is insert into the second stitch, both loops, second stitch, and across to the second stitch on the other side, and then we're going to come back again through both loops, across to the stitch on the other side. Just keep doing that 6 times to sew together that ribbing. Okay, so there's the front. And now I'm going to show you a neat trick to seam the rest of the hat together so that the seam is virtually invisible. This is the really cool thing about those third loops that we were using before. We're going to be using those again. So as you can see, I have my third loops right here. These are the top loops of the last round of half double crochets. These are the third loops. So what you're going to do is insert your yarn needle into that third loop and then across to the first stitch on the other side, pull through. Come back, insert your hook into the next third loop, and then across to the corresponding stitch on the other side, pull through. You're going to keep doing that all the way down. So you're really going to want to pay attention to make sure that you are not sewing into the same stitch more than once, because you need the stitches from this side to match up with the stitches from this side so that we end at the right place at the end of the hat. I'm going to pause here and just show you what this looks like on the right side of the hat. It looks just like any other third loop row, which is really awesome. I love this because normally when you do a hat sideways or in the up and down way, and you have to seam it, there's always going to be a visible seam, but because of that awesome third loop stitch that we did, you can't even tell that there's a seam, and I just think that's awesome. So go ahead and finish all the way up to the final third loop. I've just done my final stitch, and now I'm just going to weave in my end as I normally would. Bring it up here where I can see these sets of loops right here. Down a couple of inches. And then turn around, come back the other way. Just to make sure that my loops do not, that my seaming does not come loose. Cut. And we're done. So there's our hat. And on the back here, you can sort of see the seam just a little bit down at the bottom on the banding here. But if you were to cover that up, you wouldn't even know where it was. And that is how you make the Malia beanie and the Malia slouch. Hopefully your hat looks something like that. And if you want, you can add a nice pom-pom to it, or just leave it like that. Either way, I think it looks really cute. Thank you for following along with this tutorial. I hope it was helpful to you, and if you have any questions, you can post them in the comments, either on the YouTube link, or you can comment on the blog post, depending on where you're watching this. Or you can shoot me an email at littlemonkeyscrochet@gmail.com, and I will do my best to answer your questions. And I hope you enjoyed it.